On January 23, 1964, the 24th Amendment was ratified, prohibiting poll taxes in federal elections. With simple, direct language, the right of citizens of the United States to vote in any primary or other election for president or vice president, for electors for president or vice president, or for senator or representative in Congress, shall not be denied or abridged by the United States or any state by reason of failure to pay any poll tax or other tax. This amendment struck down one of the most effective tools used to prevent African Americans from voting. The story of the poll tax is the story of systematic disenfranchisement. After the 15th Amendment granted voting rights regardless of race in 1870, Southern states sought ways to prevent African Americans from voting without explicitly violating the Constitution. They couldn't say blacks can't vote. That would clearly violate the 15th Amendment. Instead, they created ostensibly race-neutral barriers that in practice prevented black citizens from voting while allowing most whites to vote. The poll tax was one such barrier. Citizens had to pay a tax, typically $1 to $2, to register to vote. This doesn't sound like much, but in the late 1800s and early 1900s, particularly in the impoverished South, $1 or $2 represented several days' wages for sharecroppers and laborers. For families living in poverty, choosing between feeding children and paying to vote wasn't really a choice. The poll tax hit African Americans especially hard because they were disproportionately poor due to generations of slavery and ongoing discrimination. But it also disenfranchised poor whites, which created a political problem for poll tax advocates. Southern states solved this through grandfather clauses exemptions that allowed people to vote without paying the tax if their grandfather had voted before Reconstruction, since virtually no African Americans' grandfathers had voted before Reconstruction. This exempted poor whites while excluding blacks. The Supreme Court struck down grandfather clauses in 1915, but poll taxes continued. By the 1940s, 7 states still required poll taxes for voting. Alabama, Arkansas, Mississippi, Texas, and Virginia required them for all elections, while Georgia and South Carolina required them only for state elections. The impact was devastating. In states with poll taxes, voter turnout was dramatically lower than in states without them. In Mississippi, less than 7% of African Americans of voting age were registered in 1960. Poll taxes weren't the only barrier. Literacy tests, intimidation, and violence also suppressed black voting, but they were a significant obstacle. The push to end poll taxes began in the 1940s. President Franklin Roosevelt called poll taxes contrary to fundamental democracy in 1944. President Truman's Civil Rights Commission recommended their abolition in 1947. But Southern senators, using the filibuster, repeatedly blocked anti-poll tax legislation. By the early 1960s, the civil rights movement had built tremendous momentum. The sit-ins, freedom rides, and March on Washington had awakened American consciousness to the reality of segregation and disenfranchisement. President John F. Kennedy proposed a constitutional amendment to end poll taxes in his 1963 civil rights message to Congress. The amendment Kennedy proposed was strategically limited. It applied only to federal elections, president, vice president, Senate, and House. It didn't touch state and local elections where poll taxes could still theoretically apply. This limitation was designed to overcome constitutional objections and ease passage. Congress approved the 24th Amendment on August 27, 1962. The Senate voted 77 to 16, with opposition coming entirely from Southern states. The House voted 295 to 86, again with opposition concentrated in the South. The geographic pattern revealed that this wasn't merely a partisan issue. It was a regional battle over voting rights and racial equality. Ratification moved relatively quickly. South Dakota was first, ratifying on November 14, 1962. State after state followed, though Southern states uniformly refused. On January 23, 1964, South Dakota was also counted as the 38th state to achieve the 3/4 majority, though this count is disputed. Regardless, by early 1964, sufficient states had ratified. The 5 poll tax states never ratified the 24th Amendment: Alabama, Arkansas, Mississippi, Texas, and Virginia. Their refusal to ratify demonstrated continuing resistance to voting rights expansion, but it didn't matter. Once 3/4 of states approved, The amendment became part of the Constitution, regardless of holdouts. The amendment's immediate impact was significant but incomplete. It ended poll taxes in federal elections, meaning no one could be prevented from voting for president or Congress due to inability to pay a tax. But state and local elections weren't covered. In 1966, the Supreme Court extended the amendment's logic in Harper v. Virginia Board of Elections, striking down poll taxes even in state elections. The court ruled that making the right to vote dependent on wealth violated the Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment. This decision completed what the 24th Amendment had begun, ending poll taxes entirely. The 24th Amendment teaches crucial lessons about voting rights and democracy. First, it demonstrates that the right to vote cannot be conditioned on wealth. Making citizens pay to exercise their franchise isn't merely unfair. It's fundamentally incompatible with democratic principles. In a democracy, political power should derive from citizenship, not from financial resources. Second, the amendment shows how discriminatory practices can hide behind facially neutral policies. Poll taxes didn't mention race, but everyone understood their purpose and effect. This teaches us to look at impact, not just intent, when evaluating whether policies fairly protect rights. Third, the amendment reveals how constitutional change often requires persistent effort over generations. Advocates fought for 70 years to end poll taxes, facing repeated defeats before finally succeeding. This perseverance in the face of opposition demonstrates the dedication required to expand liberty and equality. Fourth, the 24th Amendment illustrates the power of limiting constitutional amendments. By focusing only on federal elections, proponents avoided more controversial questions about state sovereignty and achieved a consensus that might have been impossible with a broader amendment. Sometimes accepting partial victory enables progress that demanding complete victory would prevent. Critics of the amendment were rare outside the South, but some argued it represented federal overreach into state election procedures. They claimed states had authority to set voting qualifications, including requiring tax payment. These arguments failed to persuade most Americans, who recognized that charging people to vote was fundamentally wrong, regardless of technical constitutional theories. The 24th Amendment reminds us that voting rights have been contested throughout American history. They weren't granted once and then secure forever. They required constant defense and expansion through constitutional amendments, legislation, court decisions, and citizen activism. Today, debates continue about voting access. Some argue that requiring photo identification to vote creates barriers similar to poll taxes, particularly for poor and minority citizens who may lack such identification. Others respond that preventing fraud requires verification, and free ID programs eliminate any financial barrier. These debates show that the 24th Amendment's core principle that voting shouldn't depend on wealth remains contested in its application. What constitutes an unfair financial barrier to voting? Where's the line between reasonable election security and discriminatory obstacles? As we reflect on the 24th Amendment, we're reminded that democracy requires vigilance. The amendment ended an explicit financial barrier to voting, but questions about voting access continue. Each generation must decide whether existing practices fairly protect every citizen's right to participate in choosing their representatives, or whether new barriers need to be dismantled to ensure genuine democratic equality. The 24th Amendment stands as a milestone in America's long journey toward fulfilling the promise that all citizens have equal voice in their government. It teaches us that this journey requires not just noble principles, but concrete action to remove barriers, even barriers that seem small, that prevent any citizen from exercising their fundamental right to vote.